I'm skipping the jacket tonight. There's already enough hot air in here, and I'm about to add more, and I just didn't think that's a thing to do, so taking that off. It's good to see everybody. I want to invite you, if you will, to open in your Old Testament to the book of Joshua, chapter 9. And in our lesson this evening, I want us to look at something that it's not really one of the better known stories in Joshua's life. It comes on the heels of their victory at Jericho and their defeat in the city of Ai. And so it comes after some of the better known stories, and maybe we don't look at this one quite as much as we do some of the others. And when we read it in just a moment, you might even think, what's really in this for us today? But before we're done, I think you'll see that there are some principles involved here in Joshua chapter 9 that are lasting, they are very practical. But before we begin reading in the text, I want to ask you a question. I think I know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Have you ever done anything foolish? I don't want a show of hands because I don't want to have to participate in that. We've all done foolish things at one point or another. And it may be that we did something foolish at a point when we thought something looked like a good idea, and then from hindsight, we realized that was not at all the thing to do. Well, as we read this evening, we're going to see that we're certainly not the first people to act in that way. And we're going to take the time tonight to read all of this chapter. I realize it's kind of a lengthy reading. I think it's 27 verses or something along those lines. But I think it's important for us to do that kind of thing every now and then. Paul would say in 1 Timothy 4 and verse 13, he would tell Timothy, until I come, devote yourself to the public reading of Scripture. We don't do that like the early church did, I don't think. I get that they didn't have Bibles that they could turn to, but there's a value in God's people coming together and opening God's Word and just looking at what it says apart from the comments that are made about it. And so let's read our text for this evening here in Joshua chapter 9, and we're going to begin in verse 1. It says, as soon as all the kings who were beyond the Jordan in the hill country and in the lowland all along the coast of the great sea toward Lebanon, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites heard of this, they gathered together as one to fight against Joshua and Israel. They had heard about the victory at Jericho, the defeat at Ai, and then the victory at Ai that followed. But when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard that Joshua, or what Joshua had done to Jericho and to Ai, they on their part acted with cunning and went and made ready provisions and took worn-out sacks for their donkeys and wineskins, worn out and torn and mended. With worn-out, patched sandals on their feet and worn-out clothes. And all their provisions were dry and crumbly. And they went to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal and said to him and to the men of Israel, we have come from a distant country, so now make a covenant with us. But the men of Israel said to the Hivites, perhaps you live among us, then how can we make a covenant with you? And they said to Joshua, we are your servants. And Joshua said to them, who are you and where do you come from? And they said to him, from a very distant country your servants have come, because of the name of the Lord your God. For we have heard a report of him, and all that he did in Egypt, and all that he did to the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon, the king of Heshbon, and to Og, the king of Bashan, who lived in Ashtaroth. And so our elders and all the inhabitants of our country said to us, take provisions in your hand for the journey, and go to meet them, and say to them, we are your servants, come now, make a covenant with us. Here is our bread. It was still warm when we took it from our houses as our food for the journey on the day that we set out to come to you. But now, behold, it is dry and crumbly. And these wineskins were new when we filled them, and behold, they have burst. And these garments and sandals of ours are worn out from the very long journey. And so the men took some of their provisions, but did not ask counsel from the Lord. And Joshua made peace with them and made a covenant with them to let them live. And the leaders of the congregation swore to them. At the end of 3 days, after they had made a covenant with them, they heard that they were their neighbors and that they lived among them. And the people of Israel set out and reached their cities on the third day. And now their cities were Gibeon, Kephirah, Beeroth, and Kiriath Jearim. But the people of Israel did not attack them, because the leaders of the congregation had sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel. Then all the congregation murmured against the leaders. But all the leaders said to all the congregation, "We have sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel, and now we may not touch them. This we will do to them. Let them live, lest wrath be upon us, because of the oath that we swore to them." And the leaders said to them, "Let them live." And so they became cutters of wood and drawers of water for all the congregation, just as the leaders had said of them. And Joshua summoned them, and he said to them, "Why did you deceive us, saying, we are very far from you, when you dwell among us? Now therefore you are cursed, and some of you shall never be anything but servants, cutters of wood and drawers of water for the house of my God." And they answered Joshua, "Because it was told to your servants for a certainty that the Lord your God had commanded his servant Moses to give you all the land and to destroy all the inhabitants of the land from before you. So we feared greatly for our lives because of you and did this thing. Now behold, we are in your hand. Whatever seems good and right in your sight to do to us, do it." And so he did this to them and delivered them out of the hand of the people of Israel, and they did not kill them. But Joshua made them that day cutters of wood and drawers of water for the congregation and for the altar of the Lord to this day in the place that he should choose, it says. Before we get too far into talking about this lesson this evening, I want to say a word or two about the circumstances that we have here. Israel, as we've already said, had just conquered two cities, the cities of Jericho and Ai. And at that point, all the kings in Canaan began to realize that they had a problem, that this was not going to turn out well for them. And they had been sitting back up to this point and watching what was going on, doing nothing about it. But once Israel kind of stumbled at Ai, I wonder if they began to think, maybe we have a fighting chance against the Israelites. And so many of them banded together. And the Gibeonites took a different approach. They didn't think that was going to work. They knew that wasn't going to work. They had concluded that it was pointless to wage war with the Israelites because the God of Israel was behind them and they were going to be victorious. And so they took a different path. And they wanted to make a treaty with Israel, but they knew that the Israelites weren't going to go for that. They knew that God had given them commands about that. And so they decided to trick them into this treaty instead. And it's interesting to me that their scheme was dependent on a knowledge of the instructions that Moses gave to them. I don't know how the Gibeonites found out about the law of Moses and what God had said about these things. Maybe they had spies listening in when Joshua read the law to the people at Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim at the end of chapter 8. We don't really know. It doesn't say. And so there's no way for us to know for sure. But regardless of how they came about this knowledge, it appears that they knew what Moses said. In Deuteronomy chapter 7, the first couple of verses, it says, "When the Lord your God brings you into the land that you're entering to take possession of it and clears away many nations before you, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations more numerous and mightier than you. And when the Lord your God gives them over to you and you defeat them, then you must devote them to complete destruction," it says. You shall make no covenant with them and show no mercy to them." That's what God had said. And so God was using the Israelites to judge these 7 nations in the land of Canaan. The Israelites were God's chosen instrument of judgment, just as he would later, of course, use the Assyrians and the Babylonians as instruments of judgment with his own people, Israel and Judah. And God had actually spoken to Abraham about these very things more than 400 years before he actually brought it to pass. When telling him, in essence, that his descendants would be captives in Egypt, he would also say in Genesis 15 and verse 16, that they shall come back here, to the land of Canaan, in the 4th generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. He didn't spell it all out. But the implication is, when their iniquity is complete, then judgment will fall upon them, and you will take their land. And so when Joshua conquered the land of Canaan, their iniquity was complete at that point, so this was deserved judgment. These were people who were deserving of the wrath of God. But let me take a moment to point out something else that is said in the law of Moses. In Deuteronomy chapter 20, in verses 10 and 11, it says, "When you draw near to a city to fight against it, offer terms of peace to it. And if it responds to you peaceably and it opens to you, Then all the people who are found in it shall do forced labor for you and shall serve you. All right, that almost kind of sounds like a contradiction, doesn't it? In one, you're going to devote them to destruction, and there's going to be no mercy shown. But here, you're going to offer terms of peace, and they're going to become forced labor, but they're going to live. And the key to the context or the key to it's found in the context. And so let's keep reading a little bit. Look at verse 12 of chapter 20 of Deuteronomy. But if it makes no peace with you, but makes war against you, then you shall besiege it. And when the Lord your God gives it into your hand, you shall put all its males to the sword, but the women and the little ones, the livestock and everything else in the city, all its spoil, you shall take as plunder for yourselves. And you shall enjoy the spoil of your enemies, which the Lord your God has given you. Thus you shall do to all the cities that are very far from you, which are not cities of the nations here. And so there's two sets of rules. It's in the land of Canaan. You are to go in and devote everything to destruction, and there's going to be no mercy shown. But if it is a nation outside, they're far away, then you can offer terms of peace. That's the background for this story in Joshua chapter 9. And so Israel was not to make peace with the nations of Canaan and weren't supposed to do so under any circumstances. But they were allowed to make peace treaties with the distant nations. And I don't know, again, how they came about this information, but the Gibeonites were evidently familiar with what the Lord had said. They decided that the only way they could get the Israelites to make a treaty with them was to trick them into thinking that they are one of these distant nations. And so they pulled out the old clothes, and they took the old bread and the old wineskins, and they set out for Gilgal. And they gave the impression that they had been on a long, long journey. When in fact, they really hadn't. And so this whole situation started when the Gibeonites heard about what had happened at both Jericho and Ai. But when you look at the way they explain things, they don't mention the victories at Jericho and Ai. They go back to Israel across the Jordan River and talk about the victories that they had there. The Israelites had defeated both of these cities relatively recently, Jericho and Ai. And the Gibeonites wanted to pretend that, we were on a long journey. We didn't know anything about what happened, just in the recent past. We're talking about a point in the history of the world when you can't turn on a radio or a television or, in our day, open up your phone and get the latest news from around the world. And so the news about Jericho and Ai wouldn't have traveled all that far by this point, all that far outside of the land of Canaan. And the end result, of course, is that this deceptive plan worked. The enemy, which hadn't had much success in battle, was able to, sneak its way right into the camp of Israel. And the leaders of the Israelites, they acted foolishly. They made a foolish decision that day. They violated God's revealed will. It wasn't necessarily their intention to do that. And so the problem wasn't necessarily that their hearts were bad. That's not what's going on here. The problem is that they were careless. They weren't thinking it through. They didn't look into it. And the consequences of their carelessness were passed down for generations to their children and so on. You want to see how this all worked out? Read about King Saul and his dealings with the Gibeonites at some point. He goes in and he kills some of them, and then some of his descendants die as a result of all of that. So this is going to play out later on. Now, one thing you find in this story, and here's one of the practical points for us, is that the price is high when your guard is low. That's what we see here. And that's one of the things that we find really all through the scriptures. Normally the Israelites would have been more alert. I mean, they are in a place they've never been before. They are taking the land of Canaan. They are no doubt just, sensitive to everything that's going around them. But they didn't think they're under attack here. And here we have a small group of people who come into camp, and they've got old bread and old clothes and worn out sandals. And this is not an army dressed up in battle array. And so the children of Israel don't know that they are in essence under attack. And don't you know that that's exactly how the devil sneaks into the lives of many people today? How many people have said the words, "I didn't realize," after they were caught in something or another? They didn't know what was going to happen. And people say things like, "I didn't realize that you could get addicted," or "I didn't realize that this would lead to an affair," or "I didn't realize," whatever, fill in the blank with it. If they had realized, they wouldn't have made the choices that they made. And they would have done things differently if they just realized what was going on. And very often we don't see Satan, we don't see him sneaking up on us in these kind of subtle ways. I read, I don't know how many years ago it was, there's a hotel in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, with a sign that says, "You can sleep tonight on the battlefield." The battlefield from the Battle of Gettysburg. I tell you what, that's what the devil wants us to think. You can sleep on the battlefield tonight. You don't have to be, alert and watching what's going on. He wants us to have a peacetime mentality in the midst of a war. And that's why it's important for God's people to learn not to let their guard down. We need to be aware of how the devil works, and we need to see what he's up to. And one thing we need to understand is that our enemy frequently changes his strategy. We all know that the devil is capable of a ferocious frontal assault. We've seen that time and again. Who among us hasn't had times in our lives when we've been attacked head on, so to speak? Peter would say in 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 8 that the devil prowls around like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour, and we have seen him at work in that. We've all experienced that at one point or another, haven't we? But I'll tell you, sometimes the devil can accomplish his agenda more effectively in other ways. And Satan will engage in open warfare. He'll do that. But he often prefers to disguise and to remain undetected, because he's been super effective at that too. He'd rather sneak his way into camp than fight his way into camp. And the one who prowls around like a roaring lion can also be likened to a subtle serpent. The Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 3 spoke of the serpent who deceived Eve by his craftiness. And the truth is, the devil is a master of disguises. A few verses later, in 2 Corinthians 11 and verse 14, Paul would say that he even disguises himself as an angel of light. And if we are not careful, we will fall for that. We will fall for his deceptions. He always uses deception. Jesus would say in John chapter 8 and verse 44 that there is no truth in him. And he'd go on to say in that same verse that when he lies, he speaks out of his own character, for he is a liar and the father of lies. That's where the source of all of that is. The writer of Hebrews would say in Hebrews 3 and verse 13, or he would talk about the deceitfulness of sin. And sin is always deceitful. When temptation comes, don't be surprised when it doesn't have a price tag hanging from it that's going to show you exactly what the price is going to be. It doesn't work like that. The price that you're going to have to pay later, or that some other person may have to pay. Sometimes that might even include our own children. There is a price tag. Somebody's going to have to pay it. And that's why it's important for us not to let our guard down. And so in subtle ways, the devil is going to tempt us to ignore or to compromise God's word in some fashion. Again, don't you find it interesting that the Gibeonites used their knowledge of God's word to trick God's people into disobeying God's word? That's exactly what took place here. And do you think the devil ever does the same thing with us? He'll use what he knows about the Bible to get us to disobey the Bible. That's remarkable, but that happens. He tried to do that with Jesus, didn't he? In Matthew chapter 4 and verses 5 and 6, the devil took Jesus to the holy city and he set him on the pinnacle of the temple, it says, and he said to him, if you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone. Jesus, this is what the word of God says. What's he doing? He's using the Bible to make something look like it was the right thing to do when it wasn't. Would have been the wrong thing to do. You think he still does that at times today? I believe he does. I may not know precisely how he operates. I'm not, privy to any of that. But I do know that he's still at work in this world today. And one of his goals is to try to break down our ability to discern right from wrong. Things that are good from things that are evil. And he loves suggesting that, things that don't seem harmful at the time. Things that may look like they make a lot of sense at the time. But that always lead us away from God. And we have to guard against that. He doesn't want sin to look like sin until it's way too late, until you are neck deep in the situation. I want you to remember that Joshua and the Israelites, they were suspicious when the Gibeonites first came to them. Did you see that in what we read? And I also want you to see that they had a way to handle those kinds of situations. They just didn't make use of it. You look at the book of Numbers, chapter 27. And I'm going to read beginning in verse 18. Numbers 27, verse 18, it says, "So the Lord said to Moses, take Joshua the son of Nun, a man in whom is the Spirit, and lay your hand on him, and make him stand before Eleazar the priest and all the congregation, and you shall commission him in their sight. You shall invest him with some of your authority, that all the congregation of the people of Israel may obey. And he shall stand before Eleazar the priest, who shall inquire for him by the judgment of the Urim before the Lord. At his word they shall go out, and at his word they shall come in, both he and all the people of Israel with him, the whole congregation." Now, only the Urim is mentioned in this passage, but in other passages it's mentioned along with the Thummim. Now, I'll just go ahead and tell you, I have no idea what that is. We're not really given a description of that in the scriptures. It's not exactly clear what the Urim and the Thummim were, but what is obvious is that they were a means of obtaining counsel from the Lord. In other words, what Joshua could have done on this occasion, or the other leaders, is that they could have inquired of the Lord about this situation. We're told in verse 14 of Joshua 9, the men took some of their provisions, but did not ask counsel from the Lord. That's really kind of what all of this hinges on, isn't it? If you're the kind of person who highlights in your Bible, that'd be a great passage to highlight. They looked at the situation the best they could from the flesh, but they didn't really seek the Lord's counsel. And I'll just tell you, there may be times when we're confronted with something and we look at what is going on, we think to ourselves, something just kind of doesn't seem right about this, and we may not even be able to pinpoint what it is that's going on there, what we think might be wrong. And really what the devil would like for us to do is he would like for us just to make a rash decision about that and not seek the Lord's will, not look into his word and try to find what it is that we need to know about all of that. He wants us to believe that we can just trust our own wisdom and go ahead with our gut instinct without looking into things more fully. But we can't. The good news is we don't have to trust our own wisdom. We can seek the Lord's counsel. Not only do we not know what the Urim and the Thummim were, we certainly don't have them. But we do have the Word of God. It's inspired by God. It's breathed out by God. It is profitable for teaching and for correction and so on, that we can be what we're supposed to be. We can find the answer. In Proverbs chapter 3 and verses 5 and 6, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths." That's the promise. Proverbs 14 and verse 12, "There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way to death." It looks like the right thing to do. It's just not. And it's costly, he says. Or Psalm 119 and verse 105, "Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path." That's what God's word is intended to be. We just have to use it that way. But as we bring things to a close this morning or this evening, I want us to end with a word of hope. And that is that when you look at this situation with the Gibeonites, what you find is that the Lord's faithfulness is greater than human foolishness. And you don't really technically see that in this chapter. We won't take the time to go into chapter 10, but in the next chapter, God takes Israel's mistake and he uses it to accomplish his purposes. Up to this point, the children of Israel had only been conquering one city at a time. They'd go and take Jericho, then they go and fell at Ai and go back and take Ai. But in the next chapter, in chapter 10, they're going to conquer 5 kings at one time. And they're going to do that because the Lord turned this mistake into a blessing. And really, going beyond that, the city of Gibeon and its people play an important role in Israel's history. The city of Gibeon was an important city in the Old Testament. David put the tabernacle there for a period of time. Solomon offered sacrifices there at one point. Solomon, that's where he was when he made his great request to God for wisdom. You remember that request that he made? That's where he was. So it was an important city. And the people of Gibeon, the Gibeonites, were no less important. By being exposed to the worship of Israel and the house of God, the Gibeonites themselves actually became a blessing to the people of God, as remarkable as that sounds. One of David's mighty men came from Gibeon. When the Israelites returned from captivity, you find a number of Gibeonites returning with them and helping them rebuild the wall around the city of Jerusalem in Nehemiah's day. They became a blessing to the people of Israel. And what we see in all of that, and this isn't the only place, of course, where we find this kind of thing in Scripture, is that God's mercy was bigger than Israel's mistake. And that even when people are foolish, it's as if God says, let me see what I can do about this. And I'm not saying that this evening so that we will look at sin and say to ourselves, it's really not all that big a deal in the end because God can overcome our foolish decision. That's not the point that I'm making tonight. I'm saying that we ought to be thankful when God doesn't let us experience the full weight of our mistakes, because he could do that. Say, you made your bed, you're going to have to lie in it. You've made this decision, you're going to have to live with the consequences. But what he does very frequently is he turns our mistakes into blessings all the same. I don't know anyone who could bear it otherwise. And what that is, that's called mercy. The greatest problem mankind has ever faced, of course, is the problem of sin. And the good news is that the Lord has even done something about that. God can take those who have transgressed his will, who have lived outside of even a concern about his will. And he can take people who have done that and make them his children. And from one standpoint, when you look at the cross of Christ, you have to look at it and say, what a terrible mistake that was. There is no reasonable way that Jesus should have ever been nailed to the cross by the hands of sinful men. But God turned that into the greatest success that the world will ever know. He made it the means by which all people can be saved. And the question for us is, will we take advantage of what the Lord has done? Will he allow, will we allow him to bless us, despite the fact that we have gone the opposite direction? It's what he wants to do. But what he demands from us is that we get back on track, that we turn, that we repent. That if we believe that Jesus is the Christ, that he is the rightful king of this world, that we change our will to be in line with his, and that we commit ourselves to him, and that we obey him. When Jesus says whoever believes and is baptized will be saved, he wasn't making a suggestion. He's saying this is what you must do if you want to be right with me. God can change our circumstances, but the truth is he can't change it unless we change our will. And so if you're here tonight and you've been resisting his will, make the decision to turn to him. Make the decision to obey the gospel of Christ. He'll give you a brand new situation. He'll give you a new life, actually. And if we can help you this evening in some way to be right with the Lord, we ask you to come as we stand and as we sing.